video I'll show you how to sew a flat fell seam on a sewing machine, a strong and durable seam and seam finish that's commonly used on jeans, shirts and workwear. A flat fell seam completely encloses the raw fabric edges inside the seam, leaving no raw edges visible. It's one of the strongest seams and seam finishes and is often chosen for projects that need extra strength and durability. This helps prevent fraying, creates a neat finish, and is comfortable against the skin, making it ideal for items that receive a lot of wear. Unlike a French seam, a flat fell seam can be seen from the right side of the fabric and is secured with a row of top stitching. Before we begin, make sure you have all the materials and tools you need ready to go. I've listed everything used in this video in the description below along with helpful links. Unlike most seams, flat fell seams begin with the wrong sides of the fabric facing together. Depending on your fabric, it's best practice to secure the seam before sewing. For example, I'm sewing a lightweight calico fabric, so I've pinned the layers together. I also have a video all about different ways to secure seams before sewing, which I've linked in the description below. Before we start sewing, make sure your machine is set up correctly. Every sewing machine is a little different, so always refer to your sewing machine manual for the best guidance. That means using the correct needle and thread for your fabric, attaching a standard zigzag presser foot, threading the machine properly, and doing a quick test on scrap fabric first. For example, I'm using a lightweight calico fabric, a size 70 or 10 universal needle, polyester sew-all thread, and a standard zigzag presser foot. My machine is set to a centre aligned straight stitch, a stitch length of 2.5, and a thread tension of 4. Pull the presser foot lever upwards to raise the presser foot. Place the fabric onto the presser foot, aligning the raw edge with the 5/8 of an inch seam guideline on the throat plate. This is one of the most common seam allowances used in garment sewing. I like to use a magnetic seam guide to make the guideline more visible and help keep the seam allowance consistent. However, only use magnetic seam guides on manual sewing machines, as the magnet can interfere with digital machines. For digital machines, use a strip of masking tape instead to create a more visible seam guide. Turn the handle towards you to lower the needle into the fabric about 1 cm from the edge. Smooth both threads towards the back of the machine. This helps prevent tangling and keeps the stitches neat when you begin sewing. Push the presser foot lever downwards to lower the presser foot and hold the fabric in place. Lightly hold the threads and gently press the foot pedal to sew a couple of stitches forward. Release the threads, then press and hold the reverse stitch button. Sew a few stitches backwards to secure the seam. For very fine or delicate fabrics, skip this step as backstitching may cause puckering. Release the reverse stitch button and continue sewing forwards. Guide the fabric along the seam guideline, allowing the feed dogs to move the fabric naturally. Try not to pull or push the fabric through the machine. And remember, never sew over pins. Remove them before they reach the presser foot. When you reach the end, backstitch a few stitches to secure the seam. Again, if you're sewing very delicate fabrics, skip the backstitching. Raise the presser foot and, if needed, the needle and remove the fabric from the machine. Cut the threads using the machine thread cutter or a pair of embroidery scissors. Using an ironing board, or in this example a pressing mat, press the seam open to embed the stitching. Turn the seam over and press the seam again. Then turn the seam over again and press the seam to the right. This helps the seam lie flat and makes the next steps easier. Using a ruler and a fabric marking tool, mark a line on the inner seam allowance 3 mm or 1/8 of an inch from the stitching line. Using sharp fabric scissors, trim the inner seam allowance along the marked line. This creates the different widths needed to form the flat fell seam. Then, on the outer seam allowance, measure and mark a line 6 mm or 1/4 of an inch away from the raw edge. I'm drawing the line this way so it's easily visible when I fold it. Fold the outer seam allowance along the folding line in the right direction so that it encases the inner seam allowance and raw edges. Press the fold flat. You now need to secure the folded seam with a row of edge stitching. I'll show you two methods, using a standard zigzag foot and using an edge stitch foot. Measure and mark a line 3 mm or 1/8 of an inch away from the folded edge. Pin the folded seam in place and tack if needed. This helps keep everything aligned while sewing the final row of stitching. Increase the stitch length slightly. In this case, I'm turning the stitch length from 2.5 to 2.6. Place the fabric under the presser foot and align the needle with the marked stitching line. Lower the needle, position the threads and lower the presser foot. Sew along the edge stitching line. Remember to backstitch within the seam allowances at the beginning and end of the seam for added strength and remove pins before they reach the presser foot. Raise the presser foot and, if needed, the needle and remove the fabric from the machine. Cut the threads using the thread cutter or a pair of embroidery scissors. Pin the folded seam in place and tack if needed. This helps keep everything aligned while sewing the final row of stitching. Increase the stitch length slightly. In this case, I'm turning the stitch length from 2.5 to 2.6. Then replace the standard zigzag foot with an edge stitch foot. Set the stitch type to a left aligned straight stitch. This allows the guide on the foot to run along the folded edge while the needle stitches consistently beside it. Place the folded edge against the guide on the edge stitch foot. Lower the needle, position the threads and lower the presser foot. Sew the edge stitching while keeping the folded edge aligned with the guide. Again, remember to backstitch within the seam allowances at the beginning and end of the seam for added strength and remove pins before they reach the presser foot. Raise the presser foot and, if needed, the needle and remove the fabric from the machine. Cut the threads using the thread cutter or a pair of embroidery scissors. And that's how you sew a flat fell seam. For more sewing Bexpertise, I've linked helpful videos in the description below. Please don't forget to subscribe, and as always, happy sewing!